The little church on the edge of Atlanta smelled like summer magnolia blossoms and old wood polish, the kind of scent that stuck to your skin in the Georgia heat. It was one of those sticky, humid days where the air felt like it was pressing down on you, making your shirt cling and your hair frizz. Inside, the pews creaked under the weight of about 100 folks' family, friends, and a handful of nosy neighbors who'd probably just shown up for the free cake. The stained glass windows threw patches of red and gold light across the room, and a rickety old ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, doing next to nothing to cut through the muggy haze. Up front, the preacher's voice hummed low and steady, like a radio tuned to a gospel station, guiding Ethan Carter and Laura Brooks through their vows. Ethan stood tall in a navy suit that hugged his broad shoulders just right, his sandy hair slicked back with a touch of sweat glistening at his temples. At 32, he had the kind of quiet strength you'd expect from a guy who spent his days hauling lumber and swinging hammers steady hands, a jaw that could have been carved from oak, and blue eyes that flicked with something deeper, something haunted. He'd been through hell losing his little brother years back, a car wreck he still blamed himself for. But today, those ghosts seemed far away. He was marrying Laura, and damn if he didn't look like a man ready to start over. Laura was a vision beside him, her ivory gown flowing soft and simple, hugging her slim frame before spilling into a cascade of lace at her feet. Her rich brown skin glowed under the warm light, and her curly hair was pinned up with a few loose strands framing her face, like she'd stepped out of a dream. At 30, she carried herself with a grace that came from years of teaching rowdy third graders patient, warm, but with a flicker of steel in her dark eyes. She'd lost her first husband to cancer, a slow, cruel fade that left her raising Tyler alone, and now here she was, taking a chance on love again. Her hands trembled just a little as she held Ethan's, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear she couldn't quite name. The preacher was mid-sentence. "Do you, Ethan, take this woman?" when the back door of the church squeaked open, just loud enough to make a few heads turn. Tyler Brooks, Laura's 10-year-old son, slipped in late, his small frame almost lost in the oversized suit jacket Laura had wrestled him into that morning. His tie was crooked, his black hair a mess of tight curls, and his big brown eyes darted around like he was looking for a way out. He'd been fidgeting all day, tugging at his collar, muttering about how dumb weddings were, but Laura had chalked it up to nerves. He shuffled down the aisle, ignoring the whispers that followed him, and stopped a few feet from the altar, his sneakers scuffing the worn hardwood floor. "Hold up." Tyler's voice cut through the room like a firecracker, sharp and high-pitched, the kind of yell that made every spine in the place snap straight. The preacher froze, his Bible flapping shut with a soft thud. Ethan's hands dropped from Laura's, and she spun around, her breath catching in her throat. The whole church went dead quiet, save for the hum of that useless ceiling fan and the faint chirp of cicadas outside. "Tyler, honey, what's going on?" Laura's voice was soft, shaky, like she was trying to keep the lid on a pot about to boil over. She took a step toward him, her gown rustling, but he didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on Ethan, wide and wild, like a deer caught in headlights. Tyler didn't answer right away. He dug into his pocket, fumbling with something, his small hands trembling so bad it looked like he might drop whatever he was holding. The crowd started murmuring low, buzzing whispers that rolled through the pews like a wave. "What's that kid up to? Lord, she can't even keep him in line for this." Another mess for Laura Brooks. Mrs. Jenkins, the neighborhood busybody with her teased-up hair and loud floral dress, leaned over to her sister-in-law and hissed, "Told you she's in over her head with this one." Ethan crouched a little, bringing himself down to Tyler's level, his voice calm but curious. "Hey, bud, you okay? What's this about?" Tyler finally yanked a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, the kind torn from a spiral notebook, edges ragged and smudged with pencil lead. He thrust it at Ethan like it was burning his hand, his chest heaving with quick, shallow breaths. Just read it," he mumbled, barely loud enough to hear over the growing chatter. Laura's heart sank. She could feel every eye in the room boring into her, the weight of their judgment pressing down like a hot iron. She'd spent months planning this day, picking out flowers from the farmer's market, sewing her own veil late at night after Tyler went to bed, praying this time she'd get it right. And now her boy was unraveling it all in front of God and everybody. Tyler, sweetie, Simon now, she pleaded, her voice cracking. We're in the middle of something here. But Ethan didn't hesitate. He took the paper gently, like it was a fragile thing, and unfolded it with slow, deliberate fingers. The church held its breath, the whispers dying down as folks craned their necks to see. His eyes scanned the shaky, uneven handwriting, 5 little words scrawled in pencil. Will you be my dad? For a second, Ethan didn't move. His face went blank, like he'd forgotten how to breathe. And then something cracked open in those blue eyes of his, something raw and unguarded. He looked up at Tyler, then back at the note, and a slow, shaky smile tugged at his lips. Ty, he started, his voice thick, rough around the edges. Buddy, you don't even have to ask. The room erupted, not with cheers, not yet, but with a messy mix of gasps and mutters. Some folks clapped, a few dabbed at their eyes with hankies, but others weren't so kind. Oh, that's rich, Mrs. Jenkins snorted, loud enough for half the church to hear. She's got him roped into playing daddy now? Poor guy don't know what he's signing up for. A couple of Ethan's cousins in the back row smirked, nudging each other like it was some big joke. Guess he's stuck with the whole package now, kid and all. Laura's face burned. She wanted to sink through the floor, disappear into the cracks of the old oak boards. She'd heard the gossip before, how she was too quick to move on after her husband passed, how she was dragging that sweet boy into her drama. But hearing it now, on her wedding day, with Tyler standing there looking so small and brave, it hit her like a punch to the gut. She reached for him, her hand shaking. But before she could say anything, Ethan stood up straight and pulled Tyler into his arms. It wasn't a big, dramatic hug. Ethan wasn't that kind of guy. It was quiet, firm, the kind of hold that said more than words ever could. Tyler stiffened at first, his skinny arms hanging limp at his sides. But then he leaned in, just a little, his face pressed against Ethan's chest. Laura's eyes stung with tears, her throat so tight she could barely swallow. For a fleeting second, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they'd made it through the storm. But then the back door slammed open again, and the moment shattered like cheap glass. Hold it right there. The voice boomed through the church, rough and slurred, cutting through the fragile silence like a chainsaw. Every head whipped around as Ray Brooks stumbled in, his boots thudding heavy on the floor. Laura's brother-in-law, her late husband's younger brother, was a mess. Unshaven, red-eyed, his flannel shirt stained with what smelled like cheap whiskey from 10 feet away. At 38, Ray looked a decade older, worn down by booze and bitterness, and right now, he was glaring at Ethan like he wanted to tear him apart with his bare hands. Yes, not yours to take, Carter, Ray bellowed, pointing a shaky finger at Tyler. That boy S.A. Brooks, my blood, my family. You don't get to waltz in here and play house with M. The church exploded into chaos. People shot up from their seats, some yelling, some whispering, a few pulling out their phones like this was some reality TV show they couldn't wait to post about. Oh, here we go, Mrs. Jenkins cackled, crossing her arms. Knew this wedding was gonna be a circus. Ethan's buddy Jake, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a tool belt still clipped to his jeans, muttered to the guy next to him, told him this was trouble waiting to happen. Laura's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the altar to steady herself, her mind racing a mile a minute. Ray had always been a loose cannon, showing up drunk at holidays, picking fights over nothing, but this was something else. She begged him to stay away today, told him she just wanted one good day, but here he was, ruining it like he always did. And Tyler was still clinging to Ethan, his little hands fisted in Ethan's jacket, his face pale and pinched like he was about to bolt. Ray, get out, Laura snapped, her voice rising over the noise, sharp enough to cut through the din. You don't get to do this, not now, not here. But Ray wasn't listening. He staggered forward, his boots scuffing the floor, his bloodshot eyes locked on Ethan. You think you can just step in? Replace my brother? That boy South Mine Court's gonna see it my way, you watch. I got rights. Ethan set Tyler down gently, stepping between him and Ray like a shield. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. But his voice stayed low, steady. Back off, Ray. You're not taking him anywhere, not today, not ever. The preacher tried to jump in, waving his hands like a ref at a bar fight. Folks, let us calm down now, this is a house of God. But nobody paid him any mind. The air crackled with tension, thick and electric, like a storm about to break. Laura's mom, Grandma Ruth, stood up from her pew near the front. Her gray hair pulled tight in a bun, her face hard as stone. Raymond Brooks, you sit your sorry self down before I drag you out myself, she barked, her voice carrying that no-nonsense tone she used to raise Laura and half the neighborhood kids. Ray spun on her, sneering. Stay out of it, Ruth. This ain't your call. Laura's making a mistake, and I'm fixin' it. Fixin' it? Laura shot back, her hands balling into fists. You're fixin' to ruin my son's life. That's what? Get out. Ray, I mean it. Tyler's voice piped up then, small but fierce, cutting through the shouting like a knife. Stop it. All of you. He was trembling, his eyes darting between Ray, Laura, and Ethan, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I gave him the note, not you, not anybody else. Me. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't the good kind of quiet. It was the kind that sits heavy, waiting for something to snap. Laura's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her ears. She looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and saw something in his face she hadn't noticed before. A shadow, a weariness that didn't belong on a 10-year-old kid. She'd been so caught up in the wedding, in Ethan, in trying to hold it all together, that she missed it. Guilt twisted in her gut like a knot, pulling tight. Ethan knelt back down, his hand resting on Tyler's shoulder. You sure about this, Ty? He asked, soft enough that it felt like just the two of them in the room. You don't have to do anything you don't want. Tyler nodded, his chin quivering but his eyes steady. I'm sure. I want you to be my dad. For real. That did it. Tears spilled down Laura's cheeks, hot and fast, blurring her vision. She didn't care who saw, didn't care about the whispers or the stares or Ray's drunken threats. Her boy, her brave, stubborn, beautiful boy, had just laid his heart bare in front of everyone. And Ethan had caught it like it was the most precious thing in the world. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around both of them, pulling them close until she could feel Tyler's shaky breaths against her chest and Ethan's steady heartbeat under her hand. But Ray wasn't done. He lunged forward, grabbing at Tyler's arm, his fingers digging into the boy's sleeve. You don't get to decide this, kid, I do. He roared, his voice slurring into a growl. Ethan moved faster than Laura had ever seen him. He shoved Ray back, hard, sending him stumbling into a pew with a loud crash. Touch him again, and you'll regret it, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous, the kind of tone that promised trouble if you pushed too far. The cops showed up then, 2 deputies in khaki uniforms, probably called by someone with a quick trigger finger on their phone. They hauled Ray out, still yelling and cursing, his boots dragging across the floor. The crowd watched, some cheering, some shaking their heads, but the whispers didn't stop. She's a train wreck, Mrs. Jenkins muttered, loud enough for Laura to hear. Always has been. Laura held Tyler tighter, her chin resting on his head, her eyes locked on Ethan's. She didn't know what came next, Ray's threats, the gossip, the fight she could feel brewing under the surface. All she knew was that right now, in this moment, they were together. And maybe that was enough. Hey guys, that's where it all started, or maybe it all fell apart. What would you do if you were Ethan? How would you handle it? 1. Get angry and slap the kid. 2. Calm down. Let me know which number you picked in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and share my videos. Here we go. The summer heat in Decatur, Georgia, was the kind that made you feel like you were wading through soup. It hung heavy over the little neighborhood of wooden houses, their porches sagging under years of wear and tear, paint peeling like sunburned skin. The cicadas screamed from the oak trees lining the street, a constant buzz that drilled into your skull if you stayed outside too long. Laura Brooks' place was a modest one-story with a patchy lawn out front and a rickety swing on the porch that creaked every time the breeze dared to stir. Inside, the AC unit rattled like it was on its last legs, spitting out just enough cool air to keep the living room bearable. It was home, though hers and Tyler's, and that S what mattered. Laura was in the kitchen that afternoon, her hands wrist-deep in a sink full of sudsy dishes. She just finished a shift at the elementary school, wrangling a room full of 8-year-olds who rather draw on their desks than listen to her talk about fractions. Her curly hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands sticking to her neck from the sweat, and her faded t-shirt had a ketchup stain from Tyler's lunch that she hadn't noticed yet. At 30, she was used to juggling lesson plans, grocery runs, Tyler's moody spells, but lately, it felt like she was dropping every ball she picked up. The whispers around town didn't help, either. She could hear them even now, floating in from the open window like a bad radio signal. Laura's got a new man already. Poor kid's gonna end up with another deadbeat. She scrubbed a plate harder than she needed to, her jaw tight. It wasn't like she'd gone looking for Ethan Carter. He'd shown up a few weeks back, a friend of a friend who heard her roof was leaking worse than a busted faucet. A tall guy with a toolbox and a quiet smile. He climbed up there in his worn-out work boots and patched it up without asking for much more than a glass of sweet tea. That was just a favor, she told herself. But then he stuck around, lingering on her porch with that easy way of his, asking about her day, fixing the squeaky hinge on her screen door like it was no big deal. And damn if she didn't feel something stir in her chest every time he looked at her with those blue eyes, steady and warm, like he saw more than just a tired single mom. Mom, you're gonna break that plate. Tyler's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and a little annoyed. He was sprawled on the couch in the living room, a beat-up sketchbook balanced on his knees, pencil scratching across the page. At 10, he was all skinny limbs and big brown eyes, his hair a wild mess of curls he refused to let her comb. He'd been quiet lately, quieter than usual, and Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd always been a thinker, her little artist, but these days he seemed to carry a weight she couldn't reach. She forced a smile, rinsing the plate and setting it on the rack. Yeah, well, this plate's got it coming, she said, trying to keep her tone light. You hungry, Ty? I can heat up some of that chicken from last night. Nah, he muttered, not looking up from his drawing. I'm good. Laura wiped her hands on a dish towel, frowning. You sure? You barely touched your sandwich earlier. I said I'm good, Mom. His pencil scratched harder, the sound grating against the hum of the AC. She sighed, letting it go. Tyler had his moods, she knew that better than anyone. He'd been 4 when his dad passed, too young to remember much, but old enough to feel the hole it left. She'd spent years trying to fill it, stitching their little life together with late-night talks and trips to the park. But lately, it felt like he was pulling away, building walls she couldn't climb. Outside, the screen door banged open, and Ethan's boots thudded against the porch boards. Hey, why all, he called, his voice carrying that easy drawl that made Laura's stomach flip despite herself. He stepped inside, wiping sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. He'd been out back messing with her old shed, trying to shore up the walls before the next rain turned it into a pile of splinters. Got that leak patched up top, Laura? Should hold for a while. She turned, leaning against the counter, and managed a small smile. Thanks, Ethan. You didn't have to do all that, you know. He shrugged, that lopsided grin tugging at his lips. Ain't no trouble. Keeps me out of mischief. He glanced over at Tyler, nodding. Hey Ty, how's that sketch comin'? Tyler didn't look up, just kept scribbling, his shoulders hunching tighter. Fine, he mumbled. The word clipped like he was spitting it out. Ethan's grin faltered, but he didn't push. Laura caught the flicker of disappointment in his eyes, though, and it twisted something in her gut. She wanted this to work, wanted Tyler to see Ethan the way she did. Steady and good, but every time Ethan tried to get close, Tyler shut him out like a door slamming in his face. She crossed her arms, her voice softening. He's just fixin' the shed. Ty. Nothing big. I don't care, Tyler said, louder this time, his pencil stopping mid-stroke. Everybody talking about it anyway. Mrs. Jenkins saw him out there yesterday. She south tellin' the whole street we got some new guy livin' here. Laura's stomach dropped. She heard the gossip too. Mrs. Jenkins, that old hen with her teased up hair and her loud mouth, sitting on her porch across the street, watching every move like a hawk. Laura Brooks move in on already, barely cold in the ground, and she's got a man hangin' around. She could picture it now, Jenkins leaning over her rickety fence, clucking her tongue at the mailman, spreading it like wildfire. The thought made her skin crawl, but she forced her voice steady. Let 'em talk, Ty. They don't know us. Tyler's eyes flicked up then, dark and sharp. They know enough, he said, and there was something in his tone, something hard and old that made Laura's breath catch. He snapped his sketchbook shut and stood, his sneakers scuffing the floor as he headed for his room. I'm going out back. Tyler, she started, but the door to his bedroom clicked shut before she could finish. She stared after him, her hands clenching the towel until her knuckles ached. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. Yes, just being a kid, Laura. Don't let it get to you. She shook her head, turning back to the sink so he wouldn't see the tears prickling her eyes. It's not just that. He's been off for weeks, quiet, snappy. I don't know what's going on with him, Ethan, and I hate it. He rested a hand on her shoulder, light but steady, the kind of touch that grounded her even when she didn't want it to. He'll come around. Takes time is all. She wanted to believe him God. She did, but the doubt gnawed at her like a splinter under her skin. What if Tyler never came around? What if she was forcing this, dragging him into something he didn't want just because her heart was tired of being alone? The whispers from the neighbors, the sidelong looks at the grocery store, they all piled up, heavy as the humid air outside, telling her she was wrong, selfish, a failure of a mom. Meanwhile, in his room, Tyler wasn't sketching anymore. He sat cross-legged on his bed, the faded quilt bunching under him, a small spiral notebook open in his lap. The pencil in his hand shook as he wrote, his messy scrawl spilling across the page. Mom deserves someone good. I've been pushing him, Ethan, to see if he'll stay. Dad's gone, and I can't stay forever either. Doc says it's bad, same stuff that got Dad. I don't want her to know yet. She cry too much. He paused, his chest tightening with a dull ache he'd gotten used to hiding. It started months ago, little coughs, tired spells, a pain that crept up his ribs like a sneaky shadow. He snuck off to the free clinic one day after school, told the nurse he just felt funny, and she sent him to a doctor who looked at him with sad eyes and said words like cancer and not much time. Tyler didn't tell anyone, not Mom, not Grandma Ruth, nobody. He'd seen what it did to her when Dad got sick, the way she shrink into herself, and he wasn't gonna let that happen again. Not yet. He flipped back a page, reading what he'd written the night before. I want a playground somewhere for kids like me, kids with no mom or dad to go when they're scared. Ethan's gotta prove he's worth it first. If he sticks around, maybe he can help her build it when I'm gone. His throat burned, but he swallowed it down, scribbling one more line. Today he fixed the shed. Didn't he leave when I was mean? That's something. A knock on the door made him jump, and he shoved the notebook under his pillow just as Laura poked her head in. Ty, you okay in here? Her voice was soft, worried, the way it got when she thought he was mad at her. Yeah, Mom, he said, forcing his tone flat. Just thinking. She stepped inside, her bare feet quiet on the hardwood, and sat on the edge of his bed. About what, baby? You've been real quiet lately. He shrugged, staring at the faded Batman poster on his wall, so he wouldn't have to meet her eyes. Nothing big, just stuff. Laura reached out, brushing a curl off his forehead, and he let her, even though part of him wanted to pull away. You know you can talk to me, right? She said. About Ethan or anything. I'm still your mom, no matter what. I know, he mumbled, his chest aching again, not from the sickness this time, but from the lie. He wanted to tell her everything, the doctor, the notebook, the plan, but the words stuck like glue in his throat. Instead, he said, he's okay, I guess. Ethan, for now. Her face lit up, just a little, and it hurt him to see it. Yeah? She asked, hope creeping into her voice. You mean that? Maybe, he said, and that was the best he could give her. She smiled anyway, pulling him into a quick hug, and he let her hold him, breathing in the familiar smell of her lavender lotion. For a second, it felt like it used to before Dad, before the sickness, before Ethan and the whispers and all the rest of it. But outside, the neighborhood wasn't done with them. Mrs. Jenkins was on her porch, rocking in her creaky chair, her voice carrying over the cicadas as she gossiped with the mailman. Saw that Carter fell out back again, she said, loud enough for anyone to hear. Laura's desperate. Ain't she? Dragging that poor boy into whatever she's cooking up with this new guy. Bet he's gone by Christmas. The mailman chuckled, shaking his head. Folks round here love a good show. She's given M1, that S for sure. Laura didn't hear it. She was still in Tyler's room, smoothing his hair, but the words hung in the air anyway, thick and sour, seeping into the cracks of their little house. Tyler heard, though. He always did. And in his head, the plan took shape a little more. Push Ethan, test him, see if he'd break. Because if he didn't, if he stayed, maybe Mom would be okay when the time came. He coughed then, a small, dry sound he covered with his sleeve, and Laura didn't notice. She was too busy holding on to the hope he just dangled in front of her, fragile as a spiderweb in the wind. The sun beat down on Lake Lanier like it had a personal grudge, turning the water into a shimmering sheet of glass that threw light back in your face if you stared too long. It was one of those late summer days in Georgia where the heat wrapped around you like a wet blanket, thick and unrelenting. The kind that made your t-shirt stick to your back 5 minutes after you stepped outside. Out on the shore, families dotted the grassy patches, kids splashing in the shallows, moms yelling about sunscreen, dads flipping burgers on portable grills that smelled like charcoal and grease. The air buzzed with laughter and the hum of boat motors cutting through the water. A lazy Saturday soundtrack that almost made you forget the world could be anything but easy. Laura Brooks stood near the edge of the lake, her sandals sinking into the soft, sandy dirt, a faded Braves cap shading her eyes. She'd thrown on a loose tank top and denim shorts, her curly hair spilling out from under the cap in a wild tangle she hadn't bothered to tame. At her feet was a cooler packed with Cokes and ham sandwiches, the ice already melting into a slushy puddle. She'd been the one to suggest this trip, a day out with Ethan and Tyler, something simple, something normal. Maybe it'd loosen Tyler up, she'd thought, get him to see Ethan as more than just the guy fixing stuff around the house. But now, watching the two of them out by the water, she wasn't so sure. Ethan was crouched on the dock a few yards away, his fishing rod balanced in one hand, the other steadying Tyler's grip on a beat-up old pole they dug out of Laura's garage. He traded his usual flannel for a plain gray t-shirt, his work boots swapped for sneakers that were already caked with mud. At 32, he moved with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of hauling lumber and climbing roofs, slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. All right, Ty, he was saying, his voice carrying over the gentle lap of the waves. Keep it steady now, reel it in slow like I showed ya. Tyler stood beside him, his small frame dwarfed by the pole, his sneakers dangling off the edge of the dock. His dark curls stuck to his forehead with sweat, and his bony knees poked out from under frayed cargo shorts. He'd been dragging his feet all morning, grumbling about the heat, the bugs, how fishing was dumb, but Laura had seen a flicker of something in his eyes when Ethan handed him the rod. Curiosity, maybe. Hope, if she dared to call it that. At 10, Tyler was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, half kid, half mystery, always holding something back. Got something? Tyler yelped suddenly, his voice spiking with a rare burst of excitement. The line jerked, the rod bending as he yanked it back, his skinny arms straining. Ethan laughed, a deep, warm sound that rolled out like thunder, and grabbed the net, leaning over the water. That's it. Bud. You're a natural, bring it in. Ethan's grin was wide, genuine, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Laura felt her chest loosen a little, a smile tugging at her lips. For a second, it was perfect, Ethan and Tyler side by side, the sun glinting off the lake, the world feeling almost right. The fish broke the surface, a little bass, silver and flapping, not much bigger than Tyler's hand. He hooped, a high-pitched cheer that echoed across the water, and Ethan scooped it up in the net, holding it out for him to see. "Look at that, Ty. First catch of the day, your dad would love this." The words slipped out easy, casual, like Ethan didn't even think about them. But the second they hit the air, everything changed. Tyler's face went still, his eyes narrowing, the joy draining out of him like water through a sieve. He dropped the rod, let it clatter onto the dock with a hollow thud, and took a step back, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "You're not him," he said, his voice low and sharp, cutting through the hum of the lake like a blade. "Don't talk about my dad." Laura's stomach twisted. She started toward them, her sandals kicking up dirt. But Ethan held up a hand, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer, steadier. "Hey Ty, I didn't mean. You don't get to say that," Tyler shouted, louder now, his chest heaving. "You're not my dad, you'll never be my dad." He kicked the rod, sending it skittering across the dock, and spun around, stomping off toward the shore, his sneakers slapping the wood with every step. "Tyler," Laura called, her voice cracking as she hurried after him. She could feel eyes on her now, other families glancing over, heads turning, whispers starting up like a brush fire. "There goes Laura Brooks again. Kid a handful, poor guy got no clue what he in for." She caught a glimpse of a woman in a floppy sun hat nudging her husband. Smirking like this was better than the soaps on TV. Ethan stood up, brushing his hands on his shorts, his jaw tight. "Laura, I'm sorry, I didn't think." "It's fine," she cut him off, though it wasn't not really. Her heart was pounding, a messy mix of worry and guilt churning in her chest. She wanted to chase Tyler, pull him close, tell him it was okay. But she didn't know if it was. Ethan's words had been innocent, she knew that, but they hit Tyler like a match to dry grass. And now she was stuck wondering if she pushed this too far, too fast. Before she could reach him, a shadow loomed up from the parking lot behind them, a hulking figure staggering through the gravel, boots crunching loud enough to turn heads. Ray Brooks stumbled into view, his flannel shirt untucked, his face flushed red from heat and liquor. His bloodshot eyes locked on Ethan, and a sneer twisted his lips as he bellowed, "Well, ain't this a pretty picture?" Laura froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Ray," she said, her voice low and tight, a warning he wouldn't hear. "What the hell are you doing here?" He ignored her, lurching closer, his boots kicking up dust. "You think you can play daddy out here, Carter?" He slurred, pointing a shaky finger at Ethan. "That boy's mine, my brother's kid. My blood. You're stealing him, and I ain't gonna let it slide." Ethan stepped off the dock, planting himself between Ray and Tyler, who stopped a few feet away, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and fury. "Back off, Ray," Ethan said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You're drunk and you're scaring him. Go home." "Scaring him?" Ray laughed, a harsh, barking sound that made Laura flinch. "You're the one scaring him, buddy, filling his head with bullshit, acting like you belong here. You'll never replace my brother, never." The crowd was gawking now, full on staring, some pulling out phones to snap pictures or call somebody to spread the word. A guy in a trucker hat muttered to his wife, "Look at Laura's mess, always something with her." A teenage girl nearby giggled, whispering to her friend, "This is better than TikTok." Laura's face burned, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream at them, "Mind your own damn business," but her throat was too tight. Her focus split between Ray's ranting and Tyler's trembling frame. "Ray, stop it," she snapped, stepping forward, her voice shaking but loud. "You don't get to show up like this, not after everything." He wheeled on her, his eyes wild. "Oh, I get to, Laura. You're giving my nephew away to this nobody. Court's gonna hear about it, gonna take him where he belongs, with family." Ethan moved then, fast and sure, grabbing Ray by the collar and shoving him back. "I said back off," he growled, his voice dropping low. "Dangerous." Ray swung a clumsy fist, catching Ethan's shoulder, and the two stumbled, grappling in the dirt. Ethan pushed harder, sending Ray sprawling onto his back with a grunt, dust billowing around him like smoke. "Stay down," Ethan warned, standing over him, breathing hard. You come near him again and we're gonna have a bigger problem. Tyler watched it all, his fists still clenched, his chest rising and falling too fast. He coughed, then a dry, raspy sound that cut through the noise, and pressed a hand to his side, wincing like it hurt. Laura's heart skipped. "Ty, you okay?" she asked, rushing to him, her hands hovering over his shoulders. "I'm fine," he muttered, pulling away, but his voice was thin, shaky. He wouldn't look at her, his eyes darting between Ethan and Ray, who was still sprawled in the dirt, cursing under his breath. The crowd wasn't done, though. A woman with a stroller leaned over to her friend, loud enough for Laura to hear. "She can't keep a man or a kid in line, pathetic." A guy flipping burgers nearby chuckled, shaking his head. "Laura Brooks' circus is back in town, grab some popcorn." Laura's knees felt weak, but she straightened up, pulling Tyler close despite his squirming. "Simon, baby, let us get out of here," she whispered, her voice trembling. She shot Ethan a look, half gratitude, half panic, and he nodded, brushing dirt off his hands. Ray staggered to his feet, spitting into the grass. "This ain't over, Carter," he snarled, pointing a wobbly finger. "I'm coming for him, you watch." He lurched back toward the parking lot, muttering curses, leaving a trail of dust and tension in his wake. Ethan stepped closer, his hand resting light on Tyler's shoulder. "You good, bud?" he asked, his tone soft but steady. Tyler shrugged, coughing again, quieter this time. "Yeah," he said, but his eyes were dark, unreadable. Laura watched him, that shadow in his face nagging at her again, something she couldn't place. Something that scared her more than Reyes' threats or the crowd's whispers. They packed up quick rods, cooler, the whole mess, ignoring the stares as they headed for Ethan's truck. Laura's hands shook as she buckled Tyler into the back seat, her mind racing. She wanted this day to fix things, to bring them closer, but it blown up in her face like a cheap firework. Reyes' words echoed in her head, "I'm gonna take him," and the crowd's laughter stung like salt in a cut. She glanced at Ethan, his jaw still tight as he slid into the driver's seat, and then at Tyler, slumped against the window, his sketchbook clutched to his chest. "Ethan," she said quietly, once they were on the road, the lake fading in the rearview. "I'm sorry. I didn't know he'd show up like that." "Ain't your fault," he replied, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the highway. "Guy's a train wreck. We'll figure it out." She nodded, but the doubt wouldn't leave her. Tyler's outburst, Reyes' threats, the way everyone watched like vultures, it all piled up, heavy and suffocating. And that cough, small, dry, but there kept tugging at her, a thread she didn't want to pull. Back in the truck, Tyler flipped open his sketchbook, his pencil scratching fast. He didn't draw the lake or the fish. Instead, he wrote, "Ethan fought for me today. Didn't run. That's good. But it hurts more now, chest's tight. Gotta keep pushing him. Mom needs him when I'm gone." He coughed again, pressing his sleeve to his mouth, and closed the book before Laura could turn around. "Phew, why all, that was a day that went from fishing to fistfights real quick," I said, leaning into the imaginary camera with a shake of my head. A lake trip turned into a showdown, and Tyler's holding onto something big. What's he writing in that book? Stick around to find out. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Who's coming out on top here, Ethan or Ray? And where you watching from today? Let us hear it. The rain came down in sheets over Decatur, Georgia, drumming hard against the tin roof of Grandma Ruth's house like it was trying to hammer its way inside. It was one of those gray, dreary afternoons where the sky looked like a wet dish rag, soaking everything below in a damp chill that seeped into your bones. Inside, the little brick ranch smelled like coffee and mothballs, the kind of mix that clung to the faded floral curtains and the worn-out recliner Ruth had parked herself in for decades. The TV flickered in the corner, some game show buzzing low, but nobody was watching it. The air was thick with tension, heavier than the humidity outside, and Laura Brooks felt it pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't shake. She stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Her jeans were still damp from the dash through the rain, and her sneakers left little muddy prints on Ruth's linoleum floor. She'd come straight from dropping Tyler off at home after that disaster at the lake. Her mind still spinning from Rhea's threats and the way those folks had stared like she was some sideshow freak they couldn't look away from. Her curly hair hung limp around her shoulders, dripping water onto her hoodie, and her dark eyes were fixed on the chipped coffee mug in front of her, like it might tell her what to do next. Ruth sat at the table across the room, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her hands folded over a Bible she hadn't opened yet. At 60, she had the kind of face that didn't take nonsense, sharp lines, sharper eyes, the kind of woman who raised Laura on grit and prayers after her own husband walked out years back. She'd been quiet since Laura walked in, but now she cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the patter of the rain like a switchblade. "You're ruining that boy, Laura," she said, her tone flat but heavy, like a judge dropping a gavel. "Letting that Carter fella hang around, stirring up trouble. Reyes right to fight for him." Laura's head snapped up, her jaw tightening. "Mama, don't start with me," she said, her voice low, shaky. "Reyes a drunk, he showed up at the lake swinging fists and scaring Tyler half to death. He ain't fit to fight for nobody." Ruth didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her eyes boring into Laura like she could see straight through her. "Yes, family, girl. Blood. Ethan's an outsider, always will be. You think he's gonna stick around when things get hard? You're setting Tyler up to get hurt, same way I did with you." The words hit Laura like a slap, sharp and stinging. She pushed off the counter, pacing a tight circle in the cramped kitchen, her hands balling into fists. "That's not fair, Mama. Ethan's good, he's trying. He stood up to Ray today, protected Tyler when I couldn't. You didn't see it." "I don't need to see it," Ruth shot back, her voice rising. "I know men like him say all the right things till they don't. Reyes a mess, I'll give you that, but he's kin. Tyler belongs with us, not some stranger you're sweet on." Laura stopped pacing, her chest heaving, tears prickling hot at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make Ruth understand that Ethan wasn't just some fling, that he was steady, solid, the kind of man she stopped believing existed after her husband faded away in that hospital bed. But the doubt was there, gnawing at her like a rat in the walls. What if Ruth was right? What if Ethan bailed when the going got tough, left her and Tyler picking up the pieces? She barely survived losing one man she didn't know if she could do it again. The screen door creaked open then, and Tyler shuffled in, his sneakers squeaking wet on the floor. He'd been out back under the awning, sketchbook in hand, rain dripping off the brim of his ball cap. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed, and he moved slow, like every step took more effort than it should. Laura's heart skipped there it was again, that shadow she couldn't name, tugging at her like a warning she didn't want to hear. "Tyler, baby, what you doing out there?" she asked, softening her tone, stepping toward him. "You're gonna catch a cold in this mess." He shrugged, tugging his cap lower, his voice barely above a mumble. "Just drawing. Heard you yellin'." Laura winced, glancing at Ruth, who'd gone quiet, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We're just talking, honey," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You okay after today?" Tyler nodded, but it was quick, dismissive, like he didn't want to linger on it. "Yeah. Ethan hit Ray pretty hard. That was cool, I guess." Ruth snorted, shaking her head. "Cool, he says. That's what you're teaching him, Laura? Fistfights and chaos?" "Mama, stop," Laura snapped, her patience fraying. "He's fine, Ethan was protecting him, not starting trouble. Reyes the one who showed up drunk." Tyler didn't stick around for the argument. He slipped past them, heading for the spare room Ruth kept for him, his sketchbook clutched tight under his arm. The door clicked shut behind him, a soft sound that felt louder than it should be in the tense air. Laura stared after him, her stomach twisting. She hated how every move she made seemed to pull him further away, how the town's whispers and her own family's doubts kept piling up like bricks on her chest. Outside, the neighborhood was buzzing, even in the rain. Mrs. Jenkins stood under her carport across the street, a cigarette dangling from her lips, her voice carrying over the downpour as she gossiped with a neighbor huddled under an umbrella. Heard about the Lake Laura's dragon, that sick kid into her mess again, she said, loud enough to pierce through the storm. Ray says he's talking him good for him, I say. She's too busy chasing men to notice he's cuffin' all the time. The neighbor nodded, her umbrella bobbing. Poor boy. She's a failure of a mom, always has been. Bet that Carter guy's outta here soon as the shine wears off. Laura didn't hear it, she was too busy fighting with Ruth, but the words slithered through the rain anyway, sinking into the cracks of the house like damp rot. Inside the spare room, Tyler did hear, though. He sat on the edge of the twin bed, the mattress sagging under his slight weight, his wet cap tossed onto the floor. The rain tapped against the window, a steady beat that matched the ache in his chest, sharper today than it'd been in a while. He pulled his sketchbook out, flipping to a blank page, and started writing, his pencil digging hard into the paper. Mom's mad at Grandma, but she's scared too. I can tell. Ray's crazy, Ethan's better, even if I don't say it. Fought for me today. That's twice now. Hurts more cuffin' one stop. Heard Mrs. Jenkins outside. She's wrong, I ain't sick cause of Mom. Gotta push Ethan harder, see if he breaks. Mom needs him when I can't be here. He coughed then, a rough, rattling sound that made him wince, and pressed a hand to his ribs, waiting for it to pass. It'd been worse lately, harder to hide, but he wasn't telling anybody. Not yet. He'd seen the doctor again last week, snuck out on his bike while Laura was at school, and the guy had looked at him with those same sad eyes, said stuff about progression and options. Tyler didn't care about options. He cared about Mom, about making sure she'd be okay when he wasn't around to draw her pictures or eat her burned biscuits. Back in the kitchen, Ruth wasn't letting up. You're blind, Laura, she said, her voice dropping low, heavy with warning. Ray's a fool, but he's kin. Ethan's gonna run when it gets messy, I've seen it before. You're gambling with that boy's heart, and you're gonna lose. Laura's tears broke free then, hot and fast, spilling down her cheeks. I can't lose them both, Mama, she choked out, her voice raw. Tyler's my world, I'd die for him. But Ethan, he's good for us. I feel it. Don't make me choose. Ruth's face softened, just a fraction, but she didn't back down. You already chose, girl. Now you gotta live with it. The words hung there, heavy as the rain outside, and Laura sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to fix this, how to quiet the doubts screaming in her head. Tyler needed her, but he was slipping away, and Ethan was fighting for them. But what if Ruth was right? What if he left? The towness whispers, Ray's threats, her own mother's judgment, it was all too much, crushing her under a weight she couldn't carry. Across the street, Mrs. Jenkins took a long drag on her cigarette, rain dripping off the carport roof. Mark my words, she said, smirking at the neighbor. She's losing that kid one way or another. Ethan's just the cherry on top of her train wreck. In his room, Tyler coughed again, softer this time, and scribbled one more line. Mom's crying. Hate that. Ethan's gotta stay, I'm running out of time. He closed the book, tucking it under the pillow, and curled up on the bed, the rain drumming a lullaby he didn't want to hear. The leaves in Piedmont Park were turning, a slow bleed of gold and red creeping across the oaks and maples, crunching underfoot as a cool fall breeze swept through Atlanta. It was one of those crisp, clear days where the sky stretched wide and blue, the kind that made you want to breathe deep and forget the weight of the world for a minute. Families sprawled out on picnic blankets, kids chased each other around the playground, and the smell of hot dogs and kettle corn drifted from a food truck parked near the entrance. Laura Brooks stood under a big oak, her arms wrapped around herself, a denim jacket slung over her shoulders against the chill. She pulled her curly hair into a loose ponytail, and her sneakers scuffed the dirt as she shifted her weight, her dark eyes flicking between Ethan and Tyler with a nervous edge she couldn't shake. Ethan Carter was down on one knee in front of her, a small velvet box open in his hand, a simple silver ring glinting in the sunlight. He swapped his work boots for a pair of clean jeans and a button-up shirt, his sandy hair falling into his eyes as he looked up at her with that quiet, steady grin that always made her heart stutter. At 32, he wasn't flashy, no big speeches, No crowd of onlookers he planned, but the way he held her gaze, like she was the only thing that mattered, said more than words ever could. Laura, he said, his voice low and warm, I've been thinking about this for a while now. I want to be with you, really be with you. Marry me. Huh? Let us be a family, all three of us. Laura's breath caught, her hands flying to her mouth as tears sprang to her eyes. She wanted to say yes, God. She did wanted to grab onto this chance at something good, something solid after years of scraping by alone. Ethan had been her rock these past months, showing up when she didn't ask, sticking around when Tyler pushed him away, fighting off Ray like he'd fight for them forever. But the doubt was there, sharp and cold, slicing through the warmth of the moment. What about Tyler? What if he couldn't handle this? What if she was choosing her own heart over her son's? Before she could answer, Tyler's voice cut through the air like a gunshot. No, he shouted, his small frame jerking upright from where he'd been sitting on a picnic blanket a few feet away, his sketchbook tumbling into the grass. His face was twisted, his big brown eyes blazing with something raw anger, fear, maybe both. You're taking her away, you're stealing her. Laura spun toward him, her heart dropping like a stone. Tyler, baby, no, she started, but he was already on his feet, his sneakers pounding the dirt as he bolted toward the trees, his skinny legs pumping fast. She took off after him, her jacket flapping, her voice cracking as she called, Tyler, wait, come back. Ethan stood, snapping the ring box shut and shoving it into his pocket, his jaw tight as he followed her. Ty, hold up, he yelled, but Tyler didn't slow down, weaving through the picnic crowd like a rabbit dodging hounds. People turned to stare, heads popping up from blankets, kids pausing mid-chase, a few pulling out phones to catch the drama unfolding in real time. Laura felt their eyes like needles, prickling her skin, and the whispers started up fast, sharp little darts she couldn't dodge. Look at that, another flop for Laura Brooks. A woman in a sundress muttered to her friend, smirking over her iced coffee. Can't keep a man or a kid straight. Poor guy, a dad in a Falcons cap said, shaking his head as he flipped a frisbee to his son. She SMS should V known what he was getting into. Laura's face burned, her chest tightening with every step. She wanted to scream at them, shut up. You don't know me. But her focus was on Tyler, his small figure darting through the trees, his cap falling off as he ran. She caught up to him near a cluster of pines, grabbing his arm gently but firm, pulling him to a stop. Tyler, honey, please, she said, her voice shaking, her knees hitting the dirt as she dropped down to his level. Talk to me, what's going on? He yanked his arm free, his chest heaving, his eyes wet with tears he wouldn't let fall. You're leaving me, he shouted, his voice high and ragged. Yes, taking you. And I'm gonna be alone just like with Dad. The words hit her like a fist, knocking the air out of her lungs. She reached for him again, her hands trembling, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, Ty, no, I'd never leave you. You're my world. You hear me? I'd die for you, tell me what to do, baby. Please. Ethan caught up then, his boots crunching the leaves, his face tight with worry. Ty, listen, he said, crouching beside Laura, his voice steady but soft. I ain't taking her from you. I want to be here for both of y'all. You're part of this, bud, not left out. Tyler glared at him, his fists clenched, his breath coming in short, jagged bursts. You're lying, he spat, his voice breaking. She's mine, you don't get to have her. He coughed, then a hard, barking sound that doubled him over, his hand flying to his chest like it hurt. Laura's heart stopped, her hands hovering over him, panic clawing up her throat. Tyler, you okay? She asked, her voice sharp with fear, pulling him close despite his squirming. What's wrong? Talk to me. He straightened up, coughing again, softer this time, and swiped at his face with his sleeve. Nothing, he muttered, turning away, his shoulders hunching. I'm fine, just leave me alone. But she didn't believe him, not with that cough, not with the way his face went pale, the way he winced like something was digging into him. She'd seen it before, little flashes. She'd brushed off tired spells, Quiet moments when he'd press his hand to his side, but now it was screaming at her, loud and clear, and she didn't know why she hadn't listened sooner. Before she could press him, a shadow loomed up behind them. Ray Brooks, staggering through the park, a crumpled beer can in his hand, his flannel shirt soaked with sweat and God knows what else. His bloodshot eyes locked on Tyler, and a sneer twisted his face as he lurched closer. "There's my boy," he slurred, his voice loud enough to turn more heads. "Told ya, kid, he'd hate this guy stealing you." Laura shot to her feet, stepping between Ray and Tyler, her hands balled into fists. "Ray, get out of here," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "You don't get to do this, not now." Ray laughed, a wet, ugly sound, and pulled a faded photo from his pocket, a blurry shot of Tyler's dad, smiling with a fishing rod, back when cancer hadn't eaten him hollow. He shoved it at Tyler, who froze, staring at it like it was a ghost. "Look at him, Ty," Ray said, his words sloshing together. "Your real dad, he'd hate this Carter bastard taking his place. Come with me." "Huh? We're family." Ethan moved fast, grabbing Ray's arm and twisting it back, his voice low and dangerous. "Back off, Ray now," he growled, shoving him hard enough to make him stumble. "You don't talk to him like that." Ray swung a wild fist, missing Ethan by a mile, and crashed into a picnic table, knocking over a tray of cups. The crowd was full on gawking now, phones out, voices rising over the rustle of the leaves. "She's at it again," a woman in yoga pants said, smirking at her husband. "Laura Brooks and her drama better than a movie. Pathetic," a guy with a cooler muttered, shaking his head. "Begging her kid like that should V stayed single." Laura's knees buckled, but she stayed upright, pulling Tyler behind her, her tears falling fast. "Ethan, get him out of here," she said, her voice breaking. "Please." Ethan didn't hesitate. He hauled Ray up by the collar, dragging him toward the parking lot, his boots kicking up dirt as Ray cursed and flailed. "This ain't over, Carter," Ray yelled, his voice fading as Ethan shoved him toward a beat-up truck. "I'm taking him, you'll see." Laura dropped back down, wrapping her arms around Tyler, who stood stiff and silent, the photo still clutched in his hand. "I'm not leaving you, Ty," she whispered, her voice raw, her face pressed against his hair. "Never. You tell me what to do, I'll do it." He didn't answer, just coughed again, a dry, hacking sound that made her stomach lurch. He pulled away, turning toward the trees, his voice barely audible. "I don't want him," he said, but it sounded hollow, like he didn't believe it himself. Ethan came back then, brushing his hands on his jeans, his face tight with frustration. "He's gone," he said, kneeling beside them. "Laura, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's not you," she said, her voice cracking. "It's me, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. He's slipping away, Ethan, and I can't stop it." He reached for her hand, his grip firm, grounding. "We'll figure it out," he said, quiet but sure. "Together." But the crowd wasn't done. A woman with a stroller leaned over to her friend, loud enough to cut through the wind. "She's begging now? Sad can't even keep her kid happy." Laughter rippled through the group, sharp and cruel, and Laura felt it like a knife in her ribs. Tyler heard it too. He slipped the photo into his pocket, his hands shaking, and started walking back to the blanket, his head down. Laura watched him go, her heart splintering, the ring box in Ethan's pocket burning a hole in her mind. She wanted to say yes, wanted it so bad it hurt, but Tyler's cough, Ray's threats, the town's judgment, it all swirled around her. A storm she couldn't outrun. Back at the blanket, Tyler grabbed his sketchbook, his pencil scratching fast as he wrote. "Ethan asked Mom to marry him. Iran didn't want him to take her. Ray showed up, made it worse. Coughed bad hurts more. They're Logan at her out there. Gotta push him more, see if he stays when it's hard. Mom's crying again. Hate that." He coughed into his sleeve, a wet, ragged sound, and hid the book before Laura could see. The night was cold in Decatur, Georgia, a biting chill that sank deep into the bones, the kind of winter snap that didn't come often but hit hard when it did. Wind howled through the bare trees outside Laura Brooks' house, rattling the windows and whistling through the gaps in the old wooden siding. Inside, the living room glowed dim under a single lamp, casting long shadows across the worn-out couch and the coffee table cluttered with empty mugs and a half-eaten bag of chips. The furnace hummed, struggling to keep up, but the air still felt raw, heavy with something unspoken that hung between Laura, Ethan, and Tyler like a fog they couldn't shake. Laura sat curled up on the couch, a quilt draped over her shoulders, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that gone cold an hour ago. Her curly hair spilled loose, framing a face tight with worry, her dark eyes flicking to the hallway where Tyler's room lay quiet. She barely slept since the park Ethan's proposal, Tyler's outburst, Reyes' threats, the crowd's laughter. It all churned in her head like a bad dream she couldn't wake from. She said yes to Ethan that night, whispered it through tears after Tyler stormed off, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a gamble, and every creak of the house made her wonder if she bet on the wrong hand. Ethan paced near the fireplace, his boots scuffing the hardwood, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jeans. He stayed over after driving Ray off, his jaw still tight from the fight, his blue eyes shadowed with a mix of anger and guilt. At 32, he was steady as ever, broad shoulders, quiet strength, but tonight, he looked restless, like a man waiting for a storm he couldn't stop. "Yes, been too quiet, Laura," he said, his voice low, rough around the edges. "Something's off, I can feel it." Laura nodded, her throat tight. "I know," she said, barely above a whisper. "That cough at the park, it's not the first time. He's been hiding it, Ethan, and I don't know why I didn't see it sooner." Her voice cracked, tears prickling her eyes. "What kind of mom misses that?" He stopped pacing, dropping to a crouch in front of her, his hands resting on her knees. "Hey, don't do that," he said, firm but gentle. "You're a damn good mom. Tyler's just good at keeping stuff close. We'll figure it out, all right? Together." She wanted to believe him, clung to the warmth in his voice like a lifeline, but the doubt was a knife twisting in her gut. Tyler was slipping away, and every step she took with Ethan seemed to widen the gap. The town's whispers didn't help Laura's losing that kid. She's too busy with her man to notice, echoing in her head like a chorus she couldn't silence. She heard Mrs. Jenkins yapping about it at the gas station yesterday, loud enough for half the line to hear, and it taken everything in her not to march over and slap that smirk off her face. A thud from the hallway snapped her out of it, sharp and sudden, like something heavy hitting the floor. She bolted upright, the quilt sliding off her shoulders. "Tyler?" she called, her voice shaking as she hurried toward his room, Ethan right behind her. The door was cracked open, a sliver of moonlight spilling out, and Laura pushed it wide, her heart pounding. Tyler's room was a mess, comic books scattered on the floor, a tipped-over chair, his sketchbook splayed open by the bed. He was crumpled beside it, his small frame hunched over, his hands clutching his chest as he coughed hard. "Wet," a sound that tore through the quiet like a siren. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, and his eyes were wide with panic when they locked on hers. "Tyler." Laura dropped to her knees beside him, her hands flying to his shoulders, pulling him close. "Baby, what's wrong? Talk to me." He tried to answer, but another cough cut him off, ragged and deep, his body shaking with it. Ethan knelt next to her, his hand steady on Tyler's back. "Easy, bud. Breathe, slow it down," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Laura, get some water now." She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing, and ran to the kitchen, grabbing a glass with trembling hands. The sink faucet sputtered as she filled it, her breath hitching with every cough echoing down the hall. She missed it. God, how had she missed it? The tired spells, the way he winced sometimes, that damn cough she chalked up to allergies or a cold. She raced back, water sloshing over the rim, and pressed the glass to Tyler's lips, her voice breaking. "Drink, honey, please, just drink." He took a shaky sip, his coughs easing a little, but his face stayed pinched, his breathing shallow. "I'm okay," he rasped, pushing the glass away, his voice thin. Just tripped." "Tripped?" Laura's voice rose, sharp with fear. "Tyler, this ain't tripping your hutton, I can see it. What's going on, tell me." Before he could answer, a crash splintered the night glass, shattering somewhere near the back door, loud enough to make them all jump. Ethan shot to his feet, his body tense. "Stay here," he said, his voice low, and grabbed a baseball bat leaning against the wall, Tyler's old Little League relic, before heading down the hall. Laura pulled Tyler closer, her arms tight around him, her heart hammering. "Ethan, be careful," she called, her voice trembling as she rocked Tyler, his small frame shaking against her. The wind howled louder, a gust slamming through the house, and then she heard it, boots stomping, a slurred shout cutting through the storm. "Tyler, where's my boy?" Ray Brooks' voice roared from the kitchen, thick with whiskey and rage. Laura's blood ran cold. She stood, dragging Tyler up with her, her eyes darting to the doorway as Ethan's shout rang out. "Get out of here, Ray, now!" Ethan yelled, followed by the thud of bodies colliding, a chair skidding across the floor. Laura pushed Tyler behind her, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps, and edged toward the hall, peering around the corner. Ethan had Ray pinned against the counter, the bat pressed to his chest, glass crunching under their boots from the broken back door. Ray's flannel was soaked, his face red and wild, his fists swinging clumsy and slow. "You don't get him," he slurred, spit flying as he shoved at Ethan. "Yes, mine, not yours, you bastard." Ethan pushed back, hard, slamming Ray into the fridge. "Over my dead body," he growled, his voice low and lethal. "Get out or I'll end you, swear to God." Laura stepped into the kitchen, her hands shaking, Tyler clinging to her side. "Ray, stop it," she screamed, her voice raw. "You're scaring him, I can't lose him. You hear me?" Ray's eyes locked on Tyler, a twisted grin splitting his face. "Come with me. Tie away from this circus. I'm saving you." He lunged, breaking free from Ethan, his hand grabbing for Tyler's arm. Tyler yelped, stumbling back, and Ethan swung the bat not hard, just enough to catch Ray's shoulder and send him crashing into the table. Dishes shattered, the room exploding with noise, and Ray hit the floor, groaning, blood trickling from a cut on his brow. "This ain't over," he spat, crawling toward the door. "I'll take him in court, you'll see." Ethan kicked the broken door open, shoving Ray out into the rain, his voice a snarl. "Try it, I dare you." Ray staggered off, cursing into the wind, disappearing into the dark as the storm swallowed him up. Laura sank to the floor, pulling Tyler down with her, her arms tight around him as sobs shook her chest. "Tyler, stay with me, please," she whispered, her face pressed to his hair. "I can't lose you, I can't." He coughed again, weaker now, his body limp against her. "I'm okay, Mom," he mumbled, but his voice was faint, his eyes fluttering like he was fighting to stay awake. Ethan dropped the bat, kneeling beside them, his hands hovering, unsure. "Laura, he needs a doctor now," he said, his voice tight with worry. "That cough, it's bad." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. But before she could move, the sound of voices cut through the wind, neighbors, drawn by the crash, gathering outside in the rain. Mrs. Jenkins' shrill tone rose above the rest, loud and smug. "She's a disgrace lettin' this happen under her roof. That kid's a goner with her. Shoulda locked her up years ago." A man's voice added, gruff and cold. "Whole family SMS, look at this." Laura's head snapped up, her eyes blazing through the tears. "Shut up," she screamed toward the door, her voice cracking with rage. "You don't know us, none of you do." But the whispers kept coming, seeping through the walls, a chorus of judgment she couldn't escape. Ethan stood, his fists clenched, ready to march out and shut them up himself, but Laura grabbed his arm. "Don't," she choked out. "They ain't worth it, just help me with him." He nodded, scooping Tyler up in his arms, the boy's head lolling against his chest. "We're going to the ER," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Grab your keys now." Laura stumbled to her feet, snatching her purse from the counter, her mind a blur of fear and guilt. She missed at Tyler's pain, Ray's madness, the town's hate, and now it was crashing down around her, a nightmare she couldn't outrun. As they rushed out into the rain, the neighbors' voices faded, but the weight stayed, crushing her with every step. In his room, Tyler's sketchbook lay open on the floor, the pencil still beside it. The last line he'd written stared up at the ceiling, smudged by a drop of water. Ethan fought again, didn't he run? Hurts bad tonight. Mom's scared. Gotta tell her soon, can't wait no more. The night hung heavy over Decatur, Georgia. A thick shroud of winter dark pierced only by the faint glow of a crescent moon slipping through the blinds of Tyler Brooks' room. The wind had died down after the chaos of Reyes' break-in, leaving behind a brittle silence that pressed against the walls of Laura's little house. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee, a lingering trace from the frantic dash to the ER and back. Tyler's room was dim, lit only by a small desk lamp casting a soft yellow pool over his bed, where he lay curled under a faded quilt, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. The walls were plastered with his sketches, superheroes, trees, a shaky drawing of the lake from months ago, each one a quiet piece of the boy he'd been before the sickness started carving him hollow. Laura Brooks sat on the edge of his bed, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her curly hair falling loose around a face etched with exhaustion and fear. She'd thrown on an old sweatshirt over her jeans, the sleeves frayed from years of wear, and her dark eyes were red-rimmed, fixed on Tyler like she could will him back to health with sheer stubborn love. It was the night before the wedding. Ethan's ring sat heavy on her finger, a promise she'd clung to after the hospital confirmed what she'd dreaded. Cancer? Late stage, eating at Tyler's lungs the same way it'd taken his dad. The doctor's words still echoed in her head, cold and clinical months, maybe less, and every cough, every wince, felt like a countdown she couldn't stop. Ethan Carter stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, his broad shoulders slumped under a flannel shirt he hadn't bothered to button. His boots were still muddy from the rain, his sandy hair mussed from running his hands through it too many times. At 32, he looked older tonight, the lines around his blue eyes deeper, carved by worry and a helplessness he couldn't shake. He'd fought for them against Ray, against the town's venom, but this was a battle he couldn't swing a bat at, and it gnawed at him, leaving him quiet, watching Laura watch Tyler like they were both waiting for a miracle that wouldn't come. Tyler stirred then, a small groan slipping out as he shifted, his eyes fluttering open. They were big and brown, too big for his pale, pinched face, and they landed on Laura with a flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or relief. "Mom," he rasped, his voice thin, cracked from the coughing fits that kept him up. "You're still here." "Course I am, baby," she said, her voice soft but breaking, leaning closer to brush a curl off his forehead. "Where else I'd be? You scared me half to death last night, don't you ever do that again." He managed a faint smile, but it faded fast, his hand creeping under the pillow like he was reaching for something. Laura caught the movement, her brow furrowing. "What you got there, Ty?" she asked, gentle but firm, her mom instincts kicking in even through the haze of grief. He hesitated, his fingers curling tighter, then sighed a small, shaky sound that seemed to take everything he had. "Gonna find out anyway," he mumbled, pulling out a battered spiral notebook, its edges frayed and smudged with pencil lead. He held it out to her, his hand trembling, his eyes dropping to the quilt like he couldn't bear to watch her open it. Laura took it, her heart pounding, a cold dread pooling in her gut. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, flipping the cover to reveal page after page of Tyler's messy scrawl words, not drawings, spilling out in jagged lines. Ethan stepped closer, peering over her shoulder, his breath catching as they both started to read. "Mom deserves someone good. Been pushing Ethan to see if he'll stay. Dad's gone, and I can't stay forever. Doc says it's bad. Like Dad. Didn't he tell her? Didn't he want her crying again? She's strong, but she needs him when I'm out." Laura's hand flew to her mouth, a sob choking out as the words sank in. "Oh, Ty," she whispered, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me? How long you been holding this?" "Since summer," he said, his voice small, his eyes still fixed on the quilt. "Went to the clinic. Didn't he want you to know till I was sure about him. He nodded toward Ethan, who stood frozen, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. Ethan's voice came rough, like gravel. Me? What's this about me, Ty? Tyler coughed a dry, painful sound and pushed himself up a little, wincing as he did. Had to test you, he said, his words slow, deliberate. See if you'd run when it got hard. You didn't fought Ray, stayed with Mom. That's why I wrote the note. Laura's breath hitched, her mind flashing back to the wedding rehearsal. The crumpled paper Tyler had slipped to Ethan days ago, will you be my dad? The moment that Dee stopped her heart and started it again. You planned that? She asked, her voice trembling, flipping through the pages, her tears smudging the ink. All this time? Yeah, he said, his voice fading, but his eyes lifted to hers, fierce despite the weakness. Wanted you to have somebody. Dad's gone, I'm going too. Ethan's good, he passed. Ethan sank to his knees beside the bed, his hands shaking as he reached for Tyler's shoulder, gripping it gently. Buddy, he said, his voice cracking, you didn't have to test me. I'm here, I ain't going nowhere. Laura sobbed harder, clutching the notebook to her chest, her body rocking with the weight of it all. Tyler, you should have told me, she choked out. I could have helped, I could have done something. No, Mom, he said, his hand finding hers, small and cold but firm. You did enough. Just don't cry too much, okay? I hate that. She nodded, biting her lip to hold back the flood. But it was no use, tears streamed down her face, soaking the quilt. Ethan's arms slid around her shoulders, pulling her close, his own eyes wet as he looked at Tyler. You're something else, kid, he said, his voice thick. Bravest damn thing I ever saw. Tyler's lips twitched, almost a smile. But then he coughed again, harder this time, his body curling in on itself. Laura's panic flared, her hand tightening on his. Ty, you need the doctor, we gotta. No, he cut her off, his voice sharp despite the strain. Tomorrow's the wedding. I want to see it. After that, whatever. He flipped to a page near the back, pointing at a shaky line. Want a playground somewhere for kids like me, no mom or dad to go when they're scared. Ethan can help her build it when I'm gone. Laura's sob turned into a gasp, her eyes darting to Ethan, who read it over her shoulder, his face crumpling. Playground? He asked, his voice barely audible. Yeah, Tyler said, his breath ragged. For kids who got nobody. You and Mom, you can do it. Promise me. Ethan swallowed hard, his hand tightening on Tyler's shoulder. I promise, Ty, he said, his voice breaking. We'll build it biggest damn playground you ever saw. Laura nodded, her tears falling onto the page, blurring the words. We will, baby, she whispered. For you. Tyler sank back into the pillows, his eyes fluttering shut, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Good, he mumbled. Knew you'd say that. Laura stayed there, holding his hand, the notebook pressed to her heart. Ethan's arm around her like an anchor. The silence stretched, broken only by Tyler's uneven breathing and the soft creak of the house settling. Outside, the town slept, oblivious, Mrs. Jenkins' porch light off, the neighbors' whispers quiet for once, but inside, the truth lay bare, a wound and a gift all at once. Laura leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, her voice a broken whisper. He's been carrying this alone all this time. He ain't alone now, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. We got him. She nodded, clinging to that, to him, to the boy who detested them both and won. Tomorrow was the wedding, Tyler's last fight to see them whole, and she give him that, no matter what came after. The notebook stayed in her hands, a lifeline to his heart, and she knew she'd never let it go. The little church on the edge of Decatur, Georgia, stood quiet under a pale winter sky, its white clapboard walls weathered but proud, the steeple cutting a sharp line against the clouds. Inside, the air was warm with the hum of a space heater and the soft glow of candles flickering along the pews, casting dancing shadows on the stained glass windows. The scent of magnolia blossoms brought in special from a greenhouse down the road mixed with the musty smell of old hymnals, a fragile sweetness clinging to the moment. It was the wedding day, and every creak of the wooden floor, every rustle of fabric, felt heavier than it should be, like the whole place was holding its breath. Laura Brooks stood at the altar, her ivory gown soft against her rich brown skin, the lace hem brushing the floor as she shifted her weight. Her curly hair was pinned up, a few strands framing her face, and her dark eyes shimmered with unshed tears, fixed on Ethan Carter across from her. She barely slept, the weight of Tyler's truth pressing down on her like a stone. But she promised him this day, promised he'd see it, and that promise kept her upright, even as her hands trembled in Ethan's steady grip. Ethan looked solid as ever in his navy suit, his sandy hair slicked back, his blue eyes locked on Laura with a quiet strength that anchored her. At 32, he carried the day like a man who fought for it, fought Ray, fought the town, fought the fear of losing them, and now here he was, ready to seal it. His jaw was tight, though, a flicker of worry in his gaze every time it drifted to the front pew where Tyler sat, small and pale under a blanket Grandma Ruth had tucked around him. Tyler Brooks was there, right where he insisted on being. His skinny frame swallowed by a suit jacket Laura had ironed 3 times to make perfect. His dark curls were damp with sweat, his big brown eyes sunken but bright, watching them with a fierce determination that cut through the haze of his sickness. He made it, dragged himself out of bed after a night of coughing fits, refusing the hospital because I gotta see it, Mom, and now he sat clutching his sketchbook, his breath shallow but his chin high. The preacher's voice rolled out, steady and warm, guiding them through the vows. Do you, Ethan, take this woman, he began. But before he could finish, a small, sharp voice broke through the quiet. Wait, Tyler called, his tone thin but fierce, cutting the air like a knife. Every head turned, pews creaking, gasps rippling through the crowd as he pushed himself up, wobbling on unsteady legs. Laura's heart stopped, her hands slipping from Ethan's as she spun toward him. Tyler, honey, sit down, No, he said, shaking his head, his voice cracking but firm. I got something. He dug into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper, the same one he scribbled on nights ago, and shuffled forward, his sneakers scuffing the floor. The church went dead silent, save for the faint hum of the heater and the thud of Laura's pulse in her ears. Ethan crouched, meeting him halfway, his face soft but tense. Ty, what's this? He asked, taking the paper as Tyler thrust it at him, his small hands shaking. Read it, Tyler said, his breath hitching, his eyes locked on Ethan's. Out loud. Laura stepped closer, her gown rustling, tears already spilling down her cheeks. She knew what it was, knew it from the notebook, from the night before, but hearing it now, in front of everyone, felt like a wound reopening. Ethan unfolded the paper, his fingers steady despite the tremor in his voice as he read. Will you be my dad? The words hung there, raw and heavy, echoing off the rafters. A sob broke from Laura's throat, her hands flying to her mouth, and Ethan's eyes went wet, his breath catching as he looked at Tyler. Ty, he started, his voice thick. Buddy, you don't even have to ask. The crowd murmured some gasps, some sniffles, but then chaos erupted from the back. Ray Brooks stumbled through the doors, his boots loud on the floor, his flannel reeking of whiskey and rain. Yes, not yours, he bellowed, his voice slurring as he waved a stack of crumpled papers, court documents. Maybe, or just trash he grabbed to make a point. That boy's mine, my blood. You don't get him, Carter. Laura's knees buckled, but she caught herself, stepping toward Tyler, her voice sharp with fury. Ray, get out, she screamed, her tears falling fast. You don't ruin this, not today. Ethan moved fast, shoving Tyler behind him, his fists clenched. You heard her, he growled, advancing on Ray. Get the hell out of here now. The crowd exploded, shouts, whispers, phones snapping pics. Mrs. Jenkins stood near the front, her floral dress loud as her voice. Laura's a wreck, look at this circus. A man in a trucker hat muttered. She's losing him, pathetic. Loud enough for half the church to hear. Grandma Ruth shot up from her pew, her gray bun tight, her eyes blazing. Raymond Brooks, you shut your fool mouth, she barked, her voice cutting through the noise like a whip. You're no brother of mine, not like this. Sit down or get gone. Ray laughed, a wet, ugly sound, and lunged at Ethan, swinging a wild fist. Ethan dodged, grabbing Reyes' arm and twisting it back, slamming him into a pew with a crash that shook the room. "Touch him again, and you're done," Ethan snarled, his voice low and lethal, pinning Ray down as the man cursed and flailed. Laura rushed to Tyler, dropping to her knees beside him, her arms wrapping tight around his trembling frame. "You're okay, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking, her face pressed to his hair. "I got you." Tyler clung to her, his breath ragged, but his eyes stayed on Ethan, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "He's stayin'," he rasped, coughing into her shoulder. "Told ya." The preacher waved his hands, trying to regain control. "Folks, please, this is a house of God." But the chaos drowned him out until Ethan hauled Ray to his feet, dragging him toward the door. "Cops are comin'," he said, shoving him out into the cold, Reyes' shouts fading as deputy sirens wailed closer. The church settled, a shaky hush falling over the pews, but the whispers didn't stop. "She's crazy," a woman hissed. "Lettin' this happen on her weddin' day." Laura heard it, felt it like a slap, but she didn't care. She held Tyler, her tears soaking his jacket, and looked up at Ethan as he came back, brushing his hands on his suit, his face hard but his eyes soft. "You still in?" she asked, her voice trembling, a fragile smile breaking through. "Damn right," he said, kneeling beside them, his hand resting on Tyler's head. "Both of why all?" Tyler coughed again, weaker now, but he nodded, his hand slipping into Ethan's. "Good," he whispered, his eyes fluttering shut. "Knew it." The preacher cleared his throat, stepping forward. "If we're ready," he said, and Laura nodded, standing with Ethan, her arm around Tyler as they turned back to the altar. The vows came fast. I do, and when Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, the church erupted in applause, uneven and messy, some clapping, some still whispering, but it didn't matter. Tyler's smile, faint but real, was all she saw. As they stepped back, Ethan lifted Tyler into his arms, the boy's head resting on his shoulder, and Laura clung to them both, her family sealed in that broken, beautiful moment. The crowd watched, some teary, some sneering, but she didn't hear them. She heard Tyler's breath, felt Ethan's warmth, and knew they'd made it. For now. Outside, the sirens faded, Ray gone, but the town's judgment lingered, a shadow on the steps. Inside, Tyler's sketchbook lay forgotten on the pew, its last page smudged with his final note from the night before. "They're gonna do it, Mom and Ethan. I won. Playground's next. I can go now." The winter dragged on in Decatur, Georgia, a slow, gray crawl that wrapped the town in a damp chill, the kind that settled into the cracks of old houses and lingered like a guest who wouldn't leave. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and Laura Brooks' little home felt emptier now, the silence thicker than the frost clinging to the windows. The living room was a shrine of sorts, Tyler's sketches taped to the walls, his beat-up sneakers still by the door, a quilt he loved draped over the couch where he spent his last days. The air smelled faintly of lavender, Laura's lotion, mixed with the stale bite of coffee that never seemed to leave the pot these days. Laura sat on the couch, her knees pulled up, a mug cradled in her hands, though she hadn't taken a sip in hours. Her curly hair hung loose, tangled from restless nights, and her dark eyes were hollow, staring at a small wooden box on the coffee table, Tyler's ashes, tucked beside a photo of him smiling at the lake, back when his cheeks were full and his laugh was loud. She lost him 3 weeks ago, a quiet slip in the night after months of fighting, his small hand limp in hers as the machines went silent. The grief was a weight she couldn't shake, a hole that swallowed every step, every breath, but it was the notebook beside the box that kept her tethered, its pages worn from her reading them over and over. Ethan Carter sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his flannel shirt soft against her cheek. At 32, he looked worn, his sandy hair longer, his blue eyes shadowed with a quiet pain that matched hers, but he was still there, steady as the oak outside, holding her when she couldn't hold herself. The wedding ring on his finger glinted in the dim light, a promise he kept through the storm, and his hand rested on hers, warm and firm, like he could keep her from falling apart. He knew, Laura whispered, her voice raw, barely audible over the hum of the furnace. All that time, he knew and I didn't see it. Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice low, rough with the tears he wouldn't let fall. He hit it good, Laura. Didn't he want you carry in it till he was ready? She nodded, her throat tight, and reached for the notebook, flipping it open to a page she'd memorized by now. Tyler's shaky scrawl spilled across it, written the night after the wedding. They did it, Mom and Ethan. I saw it. Yes, my dad now, even if it's short. Coughed bad today, hurts more. Playground next, they promised. I can rest soon. Her tears hit the page, smudging the ink, and she choked on a sob, pressing it to her chest. He was my hero, she said, her voice breaking. Pushed you, tested you, gave us this, and I didn't even know what he was fighting for. Ethan's arm tightened around her, his breath hitching. He gave me you, he said, his voice thick. Gave me a son, even just for a little while. Bravest damn kid I ever met. The front door creaked open then, and Grandma Ruth stepped in, her gray coat dusted with frost, her bun tight as ever. She carried a foil-covered dish, probably casserole. The town's go-to for grief, and set it on the counter, her sharp eyes softening as they landed on Laura. Brought you something, she said, her voice gruff but warm. You gotta eat, girl. Tyler hates seeing you like this. Laura managed a faint smile, wiping her face with her sleeve. Thanks, Mama, she said, her voice small. I keep reading it, you know? What he wrote. Feels like he's still here. Ruth crossed the room, sitting on the arm of the couch, her hand resting on Laura's shoulder. He is, she said, her tone firm. That boy was stronger than all of us, knew what he wanted. Made it happen. You read that part about the playground? Yeah, Laura said, flipping to it, her voice trembling as she read aloud. Want a playground somewhere for kids like me, no mom or dad, to go when they're scared. Ethan can help her build it when I'm gone. She looked up, tears streaming. He wanted that for them. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes wet. We're doing it, he said, his voice steady despite the crack in it. Started talking to folks, donations, plans. Gonna call it Tyler's place. He ain't leaving without that. Ruth's face softened, a rare tear slipping down her cheek. Good, she said, her voice rough. That's my grandson leaving something behind. You two make it happen. Laura leaned into Ethan, her sob turning into a shaky laugh. He tested you, Ethan pushed you till you proved it. He loved us so much. He did, Ethan said, his voice breaking, pulling her closer. And we're gonna love him back every damn day. The room went quiet, the weight of Tyler's words settling over them, a bittersweet balm on the raw ache of his loss. Outside, the town kept moving, cars rumbling down the street, lights flickering on in neighbors' windows, but it wasn't quiet out there. Not really. Mrs. Jenkins stood on her porch, her cigarette glowing in the dusk, her voice carrying over the frost as she gossiped with a neighbor bundled in a parka. Still going on about that kid, she said, smirking. He gone now, guess Laura's free to mess up with that Carter guy full time. Shoulda lost him years ago, the neighbor replied, shaking his head. Whole family's cursed, look at the mess they made. Laura didn't hear it, she was too lost in the notebook, in Ethan's arm, in Ruth's steady presence, but the words slithered through the cold anyway. A venom the town wouldn't let go. Inside, she turned to a page Tyler had written just before the end. His hand shaky but sure. Mama's crying less now, Ethan's holding her. They'll be okay. Playground's gonna happen, I can feel it. Love you, Mom. Love you, Dad. See you later. She read it aloud, her voice trembling, and Ethan's tears finally fell, silent and steady, dripping onto her shoulder. He called me Dad, he whispered, his voice raw. Right there he did. Laura nodded, clutching the book, her sob turning into a smile. He did, baby, she said, her voice soft. He knew you were. Ruth stood, brushing her hands on her coat, her voice gruff but thick. That boy was something else, she said, wiping her face. Why all hold on to that, don't let this town take it from you. We won, Laura said, her voice stronger now, leaning into Ethan as he kissed her forehead, his tears mixing with hers. They sat there, the three of them, Laura, Ethan, and the ghost of Tyler, bound by a love that outlasted the pain. A promise they'd keep no matter what came next. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, but inside, it was warm, the flicker of the lamp holding back the dark. Tyler was gone, but his words stayed, a light they'd carry forward, step by broken step. Part 9, The Final Days. The winter dragged on in Decatur, Georgia. A slow, gray crawl that wrapped the town in a damp chill, the kind that settled into the cracks of old houses and lingered like a guest who wouldn't leave. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and Laura Brooks' little home felt emptier now, the silence thicker than the frost clinging to the windows. The living room was a shrine of sorts, Tyler's sketches taped to the walls, his beat-up sneakers still by the door, a quilt he loved draped over the couch where he spent his last days. The air smelled faintly of lavender, Laura's lotion, mixed with the stale bite of coffee that never seemed to leave the pot these days. Laura sat on the couch, her knees pulled up, a mug cradled in her hands, though she hadn't taken a sip in hours. Her curly hair hung loose, tangled from restless nights, and her dark eyes were hollow, staring at a small wooden box on the coffee table, Tyler's ashes, tucked beside a photo of him smiling at the lake, back when his cheeks were full and his laugh was loud. She'd lost him 3 weeks ago, a quiet slip in the night after months of fighting, his small hand limp in hers as the machines went silent. The grief was a weight she couldn't shake, a hole that swallowed every step, every breath. But it was the notebook beside the box that kept her tethered, its pages worn from her reading them over and over. Ethan Carter sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his flannel shirt soft against her cheek. At 32, he looked worn, his sandy hair longer, his blue eyes shadowed with a quiet pain that matched hers, but he was still there, steady as the oak outside, holding her when she couldn't hold herself. The wedding ring on his finger glinted in the dim light, a promise he'd kept through the storm, and his hand rested on hers, warm and firm, like he could keep her from falling apart. He knew, Laura whispered, her voice raw, barely audible over the hum of the furnace. All that time he knew, and I didn't see it. Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice low, rough with the tears he wouldn't let fall. He hid it good, Laura. Didn't he want you carrying it till he was ready? She nodded, her throat tight, and reached for the notebook, flipping it open to a page she'd memorized by now. Tyler's shaky scrawl spilled across it, written the night after the wedding. They did it, Mom and Ethan. I saw it. Yes, my dad now, even if it's short. Coughed bad today, hurts more. Playground next, they promised. I can rest soon. Her tears hit the page, smudging the ink, and she choked on a sob, pressing it to her chest. He was my hero, she said, her voice breaking. Pushed you, tested you, gave us this, and I didn't even know what he was fighting for. Ethan's arm tightened around her, his breath hitching. He gave me you, he said, his voice thick. Gave me a son, even just for a little while. Bravest damn kid I ever met. The front door creaked open then, and Grandma Ruth stepped in, her gray coat dusted with frost, her bun tight as ever. She carried a foil-covered dish, probably casserole, the town's go-to for grief, and set it on the counter, her sharp eyes softening as they landed on Laura. Brought you something, she said, her voice gruff but warm. You gotta eat, girl. Tyler hates seeing you like this. Laura managed a faint smile, wiping her face with her sleeve. Thanks, Mama, she said, her voice small. I keep reading it, you know? What he wrote. Feels like he's still here. Ruth crossed the room, sitting on the arm of the couch, her hand resting on Laura's shoulder. He is, she said, her tone firm. That boy was stronger than all of us, knew what he wanted. Made it happen. You read that part about the playground? Yeah, Laura said, flipping to it, her voice trembling as she read aloud. Want a playground somewhere for kids like me, no mom or dad, to go when they're scared. Ethan can help her build it when I'm gone. She looked up, tears streaming. He wanted that for them. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes wet. We're doing it, he said, his voice steady despite the crack in it. Started talking to folks, donations, plans. Gonna call it Tyler's place. He ain't leaving without that. Ruth's face softened, a rare tear slipping down her cheek. Good, she said, her voice rough. That's my grandson leaving something behind. You two make it happen. Laura leaned into Ethan, her sob turning into a shaky laugh. He tested you, Ethan pushed you till you proved it. He loved us so much. He did, Ethan said, his voice breaking, pulling her closer. And we're gonna love him back every damn day. The room went quiet, the weight of Tyler's words settling over them, a bittersweet balm on the raw ache of his loss. Outside, the town kept moving, cars rumbling down the street, lights flickering on in neighbors' windows, but it wasn't quiet out there. Not really. Mrs. Jenkins stood on her porch, her cigarette glowing in the dusk, her voice carrying over the frost as she gossiped with a neighbor bundled in a parka. Still going on about that kid, she said, smirking. He has gone now, guess Laura's free to mess up with that Carter guy full time. Shoulda lost him years ago, the neighbor replied, shaking his head. Whole family's cursed, look at the mess they made. Laura didn't hear it, she was too lost in the notebook, in Ethan's arm, in Ruth's steady presence, but the words slithered through the cold anyway. A venom the town wouldn't let go. Inside, she turned to a page Tyler had written just before the end. His hand shaky but sure. Mama's crying less now, Ethan's holding her. They'll be okay. Playground's gonna happen, I can feel it. Love you, Mom. Love you, Dad. See you later. She read it aloud, her voice trembling, and Ethan's tears finally fell, silent and steady, dripping onto her shoulder. He called me Dad, he whispered, his voice raw. Right there he did. Laura nodded, clutching the book, her sob turning into a smile. He did, baby, she said, her voice soft. He knew you were. Ruth stood, brushing her hands on her coat, her voice gruff but thick. That boy was something else, she said, wiping her face. Why all hold on to that, don't let this town take it from you. We won, Laura said, her voice stronger now, leaning into Ethan as he kissed her forehead, his tears mixing with hers. They sat there, the three of them, Laura, Ethan, and the ghost of Tyler, bound by a love that outlasted the pain. A promise they'd keep no matter what came next. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, but inside, it was warm, the flicker of the lamp holding back the dark. Tyler was gone, but his words stayed, a light they'd carry forward, step by broken step. Oh my gosh, guys, that was a real punch in the chest. Tyler's gone, but he left something huge behind. What happens next for Laura and Ethan? Stay to find out. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. Number 1 if you love the boy, number 2 if you don't, and where are you watching tonight? Let us know.